The Australian Financial Review.
He said it was the worst career decision of my life. It actually just really added fuel to my fire, and I think I've been quite good at looking at the next step in my career and just having confidence in what I want to do. But he said it would be the end of my career in journalism, but in fact it was the beginning.
Hi, I'm Sally Patton, editor of Boss from the Australian Financial Review, and welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success and failure and everything in between, and along the way we're hoping to get some really great advice from our leaders. My guest today is Kellie Hush, the Chief Executive of Australian Fashion Week for 2025. Hi Kellie.
Hey, how are you going?
Thank you so much for coming in, and I'm very well, thank you. Now, Kellie, as I said, you're the Chief Executive of Australian Fashion Week for 2025, but that is only a very small portion of what you do. You are also the co-founder and Chief Strategy and Brand Officer of The Vault, which is a designer fashion rental marketplace. Indeed, you have had an illustrious career in fashion. You are a former editor-in-chief of Harper's Bazaar and a former fashion editor of the Sydney Morning Herald. You've also worked as a senior advisor to fashion icon Carla Zampatti. So when did you fall in love with clothes, assuming you at some point did fall in love with clothes?
I always loved clothes. I mean, I grew up in Canberra, and in year 11 and 12, I didn't have to wear a school uniform. So I think that's probably when I started really experimenting, because I could go to school and, wear whatever I wanted. So I'd always loved fashion, but I never thought that you could combine a career with a passion like that. So as soon as I left school, I went into journalism. Growing up in Canberra, I wanted to be like the next Yana, which I think everyone did. And I thought I'd go into political journalism, but that wasn't the pathway I ended up going. But I really didn't think I could combine, my passion for fashion. I loved dressing. I loved op shopping. I loved experimenting with fashion. I did crazy things with my hair. I wore overalls when everyone else was wearing skinny jeans. I wore hats to university. I've just always loved it.
So we might come to that career path later, but we have only got 15 minutes. Let's start the clock and get cracking. What is your morning routine like? What time do you get up? What happens?
I'm an early riser. I get up. I get up between 5:30 and 6. I have one child left at home who's in her final years of school, so I actually like packing her lunch, and then I exercise. So it's Pilates or spin, and then I walk my dog. So it's pretty jam-packed. And then I probably get to my desk, if I'm honest, probably about 9:30, 10. But I'm a bit of a procrastinator in the morning. I like pottering a little bit. But the exercise routine in the morning is really important to me.
And do you have a cup of coffee at some point during all of that?
Yeah, I always have a coffee as soon as I get up. So I'm packing the lunch and having a cup of coffee, and then I'll exercise, and then I'll have another coffee when I walk the dog. So I'm pretty wired by the time I sit down.
And breakfast?
Yeah, I always eat breakfast. I'm hungry when I get up in the morning. I'm pretty boring though. It's always just muesli and yogurt and fruit. Just easy and quick.
Yeah, okay. My next question is about a pivotal moment in your career. Was there something that you worked on, like a project, a promotion that you were given, that somehow changed the whole nature of what you were doing?
Yeah, I was a young journalist at Who Weekly magazine, and they were launching In Style magazine in Australia, which was a fashion celebrity magazine. And the editor-in-chief of that asked me to come across from Who Weekly.
And what were you doing at Who Weekly?
I was a junior reporter. I think because of my love of fashion too, they'd moved me into those kind of fashion stories. I wasn't one of the news journalists. I had started as a reporter, so a fact checker, but I was at that stage a junior writer. So I went across to In Style magazine as features editor, and I think that's when I really realised that I could combine my love of fashion with a career. But at the time, the editor, I won't mention his name because he's still around, but he said it was the worst career decision of my life. It would be the end of my career in journalism, but in fact it was the beginning.
So this was the editor of Who magazine?
Editor of Who magazine said that to me. All due respect to him, but he was a news journalist. He'd kind of, I suppose, grown up in newspapers, and he didn't really understand what InStyle was and what the opportunity ahead was for me.
And how did you get from political journalism into fashion journalism?
When I left university, I did journalism at the University of Canberra, and I had a job at Prime News. At 21, I looked about 12. So so I was sent out to do stories, and I found it really hard. The credibility issue was a big issue for me. I was sent to do police stories, and I just kind of realised then that it was going to be a really, really hard challenge for me. And maybe it was a bit of misogyny back then in journalism as well, that I was this young little thing.
Yeah.
So I think I worked out pretty quickly that it was going to be hard, to that credibility piece. And television at the time, I think I thought that that's what I wanted to do, but I think at the end of the day I didn't like that there was no creativity in it either.
So what did you do then?
I packed up my bags and left Canberra, and I got a job at Practical Parenting magazine. I just went into print journalism. I wanted to leave home. I wanted to spread my wings, and I did that for a little bit and knew nothing about children or babies. And they then moved me on to Bride to Be magazine, and I suppose that's, a little bit of fashion there. And then after that I got my job at Who Weekly, which was really kind of my first big job in journalism. Back in those days it was an incredible operation, amazing journalists and leadership at that magazine, and most of those journalists are still friends of mine today. So it was a really great creative environment.
And what would you say to the editor of Who magazine now?
Funny enough, I actually ran into him on the street one day in Melbourne when I was down there, and he actually said to me, "I got it wrong, didn't I, Kel?" So, it was quite funny, and, I appreciated that. It actually just really added fuel to my fire, just having confidence in what I want to do. I didn't want to be editor-in-chief of Who Weekly magazine, and I think I've been quite good at that, of looking at the next step in my career. And if that's not what I want to do, then where's the pivot?
If you knew that you didn't want to be editor of Who magazine, did you know what you wanted to be?
Listen, I always loved fashion, and I think that's why I was probably put, into those kind of more creative spaces at Who Weekly. So we used to do those great, sexiest people now, or most beautiful, those kind of portfolio stories. We also did, big fashion editions. I worked on those a lot. So I knew that side I really enjoyed and I loved, and less so doing the big news stories. That wasn't really my thing. It wasn't until, head office in New York said we're launching it in Australia that it was like, okay, that's where I want to go.
So what is the best piece of career advice you've ever been given?
It was probably when I started at Harper's Bazaar. I had to fly to New York to meet the Hearst international team, and Glenda Bailey, who was editor-in-chief of US Harper's Bazaar, which is a very prestigious job, I had a meeting with her, and she'd laid out all of the editions from around the world. At that stage, there was probably about 35 of them, and we're going through them, looking at the covers, and she said, it's really important as Harper's Bazaar Australia that you can identify that magazine amongst this sea of magazines, that you are talking to your customer, because readers are essentially customers, right? You are talking to your readership. You are uniquely Australian. That's who your customer is. And I've taken that comment away for a lot of the jobs. Use that comment, it's who is the customer? And it's not an ego trip. It's not about Kellie Hush, what Kellie Hush likes and blah, blah, blah. I'm editing a magazine or curating an online store for the customer. And I thought that was a really important piece of advice that I've taken into a couple of different roles that are unrelated to media, but I thought it was a really poignant comment.
That's really interesting. So how then do you go about finding out who that customer is so you can appeal to them? Because that's, I assume, easier said than done.
It is. And, obviously back in the day with media companies, you did a lot of market research. You spoke to your readers. You understood, how much they earned, what cars they drove, where they lived, their shopping habits. Then we'd curate the magazine to her. But, also being a custodian of a brand is a responsibility, and there is, within that custodianship, the DNA of the magazine. So Harper's Bazaar was about celebrating women and fashion, but it was always beautiful. It was never cutting-edge fashion. And we would know too, back in the day you'd get letters, and then with social media you'd get feedback as well. But we were trying to sell a magazine every month, so you wanted that reader to want to dive into it because it really spoke to her.
So have you always been quite demanding of the people who work for you to make sure you keep on top of the customer and what the customer wants?
Absolutely. I had a fashion director once that went and did a cover shoot for me in the US, and, there was budget for her to do a fashion shoot off the back of it. And then the fashion shoot came back and it was grungy and hard and shot in an old, dirty, abandoned basketball court, and the model was really androgynous. It really wasn't what Harper's Bazaar was about. It was too edgy. And, it was her fault and my fault for not managing it, closely enough. So
what did you do in that circumstance?
Back in those days, it's not like, Devil Wears Prada or, where you could just kill a story. I had to run it. But, it didn't look great in the magazine. It was jarring, and that happened a couple of times. And it was creatives on the team wanting to do something for them rather than thinking about the DNA of the magazine.
Ah, interesting. So how did you go about telling them that what they were doing was appealing to perhaps them more so than the customer?
I said, do you want to be the woman in the photo? Do you want to be the woman in the picture? Like, do you want to look like her, dress like her? Like, really, do you think the team, our reader, wants to be that woman in the picture?
To which the answer, I guess, was no.
No. Yeah.
Right. So they got the message pretty quickly?
Yeah. For me, because I've been in the industry for a long time, I've been asked a lot over, almost 3 decades, what is Australian fashion about? What does it represent? And for me, it's always been optimism. So I was very clear to the team that it had to be full of optimism. Anything that we did, all the touch points had to be optimistic, because we're inviting brands to come in who I think represent the optimism of Australia. And so the platform had to represent that as well.
And is that something that you do in other jobs you have or have had too, where you've got one or two, say, words in mind that you're trying to focus on and portray?
Absolutely, and I'm one of those people. If you came to my home office, you would see Post-it notes, and I have all these little, actually really lovely pieces of paper. I like paper stock. I think it's from being in magazines for a long time, and I write words on them constantly. They're just reminders of what I'm doing, what I'm focused on in the long term, and they can be as simple as a word, or it's what I think the business should be focused on, and I just have them kind of scattered around. They're nice little reminders when I'm on a video call, or I'm having a bit of a day where I'm not always totally organised, so I'll organise my little notes, and it gets me motivated again.
I love that concept. So what are some of the things that are written on your postal notes if I came into your home office right now?
It's things like always remember what women want to wear. There's always optimism. I have fingers in a lot of pies, and with the Vault, we're working on some really big, ambitious projects, which is bigger than the marketplace. So I have to stay focused on what that wider and bigger ambition is. Some of them get pinned on a pinboard next to me. Others just sit on my computer, and I just move through them.
So how many would you have out of interest?
I've got about 6 at the moment and 3 on my pinboard. And then I do rotate them, but I have kept optimism from Fashion Week. I think if anything, maybe a part of my success is that I'm optimistic, because I've had lots of career challenges, I've had life challenges, but I think it's having that optimism, because to be successful you have to get through really tough things and remain optimistic about the end goal.
So optimism for the fashion and optimism for yourself.
Yeah.
Dual purpose. Love it. Okay.
Yeah.
On that note, we are going to take a short break, but Kellie, don't go away. We're going to come back very shortly and open our beautiful chatterbox. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with Kellie Hush, the Chief Executive of Australian Fashion Week for 2025. Now, Kellie, this is our chatterbox. It's a beautiful brown shiny box, inside which are about 15 questions. I'm going to ask you to pick out a few one by one, and we'll have a little bit more Q&A. Please, have a fish.
Nerve-wracking.
Do you have a coping mechanism for high-stress situations?
I'm better at stepping away for a moment. People would say I'm a hothead, which I am. I would agree with that. So there are times when I get tipped over, I am a bit of a hothead, but I think it's taking a breath. I now, as I get older, I'm better at working things through my head before I say it, and I think that comes with maturity and managing people. I haven't always been a perfect manager, and I don't mince words. I'm very clear on what I think.
So do you have a bit of a secret or a method to stopping and thinking before you speak? Do you breathe, or do you do something to prevent you from speaking?
I will say what I want to say in my head, and then I don't say it.
That's a good mechanism.
Yeah. Throughout your career, you realise that people that work with you are coming to you for your leadership. There is a responsibility with that. So, yeah, I say it in my head, then I don't say it. I refine it and say what is the correct and the right way forward. But with that, I'm trying to slow my reactions down, and that's what works for me.
I love that. I'm going to adopt that. Say it in your head first. Okay, Kellie, have another fish in the box. Thank you. How do you make tough decisions?
I am a gut person. I pretty much have a gut reaction, and I'll back myself. I've had a couple of really tough things happen in my career. I think I know that a tough decision doesn't mean the end of something as well, because I've as I said, I've had a few tough things happen in my career. So I know if I make those decisions, it's not the end of the world. I'm pretty big on gut and will back myself on a tough decision.
And can you give me an example of a tough decision on which you were at the receiving end. What happened and how did you recover, and perhaps what did you learn from that?
I left media in 2018 and set up a retail business. I went into business with someone and 18 months in, he got rid of me. It was pretty public. That was really tough. I would say that I was pretty depressed after it. I was humiliated. I was unemployed for the first time in my life. But, you know, my beautiful friend Carla Zampatti called me and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm unemployed. I'm not doing anything." She said, "Come over for a cup of tea." And even though it was really tough and I just wanted to probably crawl up in a ball and stay in bed, I just got up and started working again. From there, you know, I worked with Carla and I started consulting with other brands. You know, I met one of my co-founders at The Vault, and, you know, I think that I just had to get up and keep moving. I knew I was good at what I did. It just was the wrong project, right? The wrong business partner, the wrong project for me straight out of media. But, you know, I picked myself up and, you know, I've now got an incredible career path.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Have another fish in the box. What part of your job don't you like?
I really don't like spreadsheets. I think anyone that has worked with me, you know, my CTO at The Vault, every time he puts a big, you know, infographic in front of me, you know, a project plan, I roll my eyes. Being a creative, and I think I have a really short attention span. You know, I can read a P&L. I don't mind going through them. But, I find that hard. It's a part of the job, but I don't like spreadsheets.
Great. Have another fish in the box. What is the most common piece of work or life advice you think actually is BS?
Having it all.
Because?
I just don't think you can. I just think there's always something going on in your life that's not perfect. People that say that, you know, they can do it all, and I just think it's rubbish. I got my dream job at Harper's Bazaar and 8 months later I was diagnosed with breast cancer. So all of a sudden you've got the dream job and then you're battling, you know, a disease, or there's things going on at home, or you've got things happening with parents and friends, and, you know, and then you start a business and then you get kicked out of your business. I just don't think you can have it all. I think you've got to be prepared that life's not going to be perfect. That's why when things are going really great, you enjoy that, and then you come back and you know you've got a lot of work to do.
On that note, thank you so much, Kellie. I'm going to now close the chatterbox. And ask you one final question, which is, if you weren't the CEO of Australian Fashion Week 2025 and you weren't a co-founder of The Vault, what on earth would you be doing?
My family would say that I would like to be a Matilda. Listen, I love sport. I really love it. I'm a contradiction because I'm a fashion person that loves sport. I'd probably be in sport in some capacity. Maybe I should have been a sports journalist, and it may have been a very different career path.
That's really interesting. So how does that go down in the fashion world? Because I imagine there aren't many people in the fashion world who are that keen on sport, especially ball games.
Do you know what? It is really great when I'm at dinners and I'm usually sat next to the CEO or the CFO, and I can talk fashion and I can talk sport. It's actually a great party trick. If I find that the person I'm sitting next to is not that interested in fashion, then I can talk about rugby union, I can talk about soccer, I can talk about NRL, and I can talk about AFL. So I'm pretty good at talking about sport. If they want to talk about an Excel spreadsheet, then I'm in trouble.
I love it. And that's it. Your time is up. Kellie, I love the way you've always focused on the customer and how keeping them in front of mind is key for you. I've really enjoyed hearing about the way you have Post-it notes everywhere around your office to remind you of where your focus should be. And I'd like to wish you all the best for your future career playing with the Matildas. Good luck with that. Kellie, thank you so much for coming in and allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing the podcast or writing a review, as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com, and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, produced and edited by Mandy Coulin. Head of audio is Alex Gow, and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini.
The Australian Financial Review.